right, welcome to Sutures and Cents, where Tegaderm meets Top Line and Surgiflow meets soft costs. In ambulatory surgery centers and hospital ORs, we talk clinical to business people and business to clinical people. I'm Mark Copeland. He's Ryan Pistone. We are Sutures and Cents. Ryan, today we have the second part of our interview with Hank Balch. Hank is the co-founder and CEO of Beyond Clean, which is, the nexus of all things sterile processing. They're an education, a marketing, a thought leader platform for sterile processing. And a couple of things that Hank brought up here that I think I'm looking forward to, listening to again. And I'm curious of your thoughts. But he said three things that kind of jumped out at me. Number one in this, he says, this is the age of sterile processing, finally, which I'd never heard before. He talks about why sterile processing has to, his term, compete against surgical services and pharmacy for money. And why, and this is a weird one, why the Joint Commission coming in and bugging them is actually good for sterile processing. How about that?
I obviously wasn't part of this interview. I was on vacation. I hate to tell you, I didn't miss you when I was on the beach. But my takeaway here, and we're going to dive into it in a second, is that joint commission thing was fascinating, right? Because we'll say them uncovering maybe the forgotten part of a hospital has benefited sterile processing greatly, because it was like, hey, you guys, that thing that you didn't pay attention to, we're paying attention to it, so now you do too. So I would say let's kick it over to the interview, and then we'll do a short recap at the end, because it was great.
Let's roll it. So I'll try not. I'll bring the hot button, the funny part up to you, but I think you'll laugh. How should appreciation to sterile processing departments be shown? And the quick answer is not pizza parties, from what I've read.
Have you been reading?
From time to
reading
time.
My mail. Yeah. So recognition. I kind of stepped in it. For those of y'all who are not tracking with the background story there, so I do get some heat because I really knocked the pizza parties. I'm not the only one that knocked pizza parties, but I think folks kind of take a little personal if they do throw pizza parties. Like, everyone likes a good pizza. No one's arguing with that. But the problem is, if that's your only, if you're a one-trick pony for recognition, and no matter what happens, like you win the World Series or you save a life, you get a pizza party, well, that pizza party starts losing its taste very quickly, and all the grumbling begins, and it just feeds into it. So recognition is massively important, especially, again, to your reference about compensation in an industry where we don't pay enough. Or we don't pay enough to keep the high performers. Like, you really start getting some high performers and they really want to grow, and there's no standardized pathway for growth, like I mentioned. Well, you're not going to keep them there by just saying, we're going to treat you the same that we treat all these low performers, right? Everyone's just going to get paid the same. You're going to get the same praise, or you're going to get the same pizza, right? You really got to identify everything that goes right in your department, and then be intentional about being creative as a leader, again, speaking to leaders, of coming up with creative ways to call that out. Small and big, right? I know that you can't necessarily just bonus the people anytime that you want to and say, hey, like, we did a great quarter, guys. Everyone's getting another $1,000 on their check. But you can incentivize and train toward growth in your high performers. And I found one of the best ways to do that is just being consistent on how you treat low performers. I might have kind of alluded to that earlier, but if you're a high performer and you're listening to this, you're going to know exactly what I mean. No one likes working with low performers. I think even other low performers don't like working with low performers. We all want to be surrounded by people that got their nose to the grindstone and they're really killing it. What kills departments, especially in terms of recognition again, is when we flatten it all and we treat everyone as if you're all contributing the same, you're all doing the same, when everyone who's got their eyes open knows who's out there really killing it, really carrying the team, really coming in clutch. And if you're not calling that out on a regular basis, you're not even giving that example to your team of, hey, this is what it looks like to do a good job. You're actually just assuming, hey, you don't see it, it don't matter, and we're going to treat everyone as if that's the case, and it's really sad.
Yeah. Well, I didn't realize when we were getting on we were going to be having sort of the management thought process in this, but I like it, right? Because Hank, it's a symbol and a sign of how people like you and you in particular, you know what you do is valuable and you're treating it as such, right? And historically, when I got into spine in 2005, I mean, the things I would hear in the OR were about sterile processing were nasty. Right. And it'd be funny, like, and I'd be like, well, and I wasn't sort of raised that way, but I'd be schlepping spine trays into a hospital, and John Crossan is greeting me with a smile, and it's hard, and I'm like, man, if I were him, I don't know that I'd be smiling. Like, I don't know how he does it, and he's looking out for me, right? And so, like, I'd be in the OR, and I'd say, hey, listen, you know, like, I get it's, but like, I'll call him and ask him when it's coming or what's going, like, because it wasn't right, and I could see. And I think maybe vendor reps miss this sometimes. I could see what you guys were doing. I didn't understand any of it. Right? I didn't understand any of it. But I could at least see, well, like, how do you treat these people like this who, by the way, let's just be totally self-serving. You can't function without them. You know? I mean, let's just think strictly about what's in it for me. If my sterile processing team goes on strike or quits, we're not doing anything. If I'm a surgeon, I've never understood how, like, surgeons don't come down and visit your department. I know when it happens, like, you got to have the AED ready because people collapse. You got to, like, hang on for a second. There's a surgeon here, and you got to wait. Like, I don't understand that.
Yeah, there's an assumption of simplicity for sure. You know, and that's where some of the hubris comes from. Is, hey, how hard can it be to rinse off some trays? You know, put it in the automated washer, then put it back together, wrap it up, and then just throw it in the autoclave, and then you're done. And for many decades, like, it was potentially treated as that kind of simple process. There's always been people in sterile processing, especially, who knew it was complex and who really cared about, guarding the process and improving the process. But until I think the advent of a lot of, the media and the content, and until Joint Commission started really paying more attention to sterile processing, started citing the crap out of these departments, and then the C-suite started paying attention, saying, well, we can't really ignore them anymore because now it's going to come back and bite us on the citation side, and we can't stomach that. And so that helped us a lot. The intersection of a lot more of this regulatory oversight, couple of well-placed outbreaks, not that, we planned that or we want that, but that happened at the same time. And now we've got all this content and all these training platforms to really be pushing the entire industry up at the same time. It's a really, like, I call it the age of sterile processing, that everyone's waking up. Now we got education. Now we got technology. We got investment coming in like never before. And it's not your grandma's SPD anymore. So what we see many times, and even the Joint Commission has, cited this, is they'll come in and they'll find out that you got an OR nurse that comes down sometimes when it's slow, and they put together their own trays. Well, they ask them, hey, where are your competencies that you can put this tray together? Or, where are your competencies that you can decontaminate this tray? Well, the nurse is like, oh, I'm a nurse. I can do this clearly. Well, Joint Commission's like, well, I have no record that you actually know what you're doing because there's no competencies in your file that say that. And so we're really getting structures in place to clarify the roles, and we're starting to show the operating room and everyone else in the customer side of things that this is a complex process, a lot of microbiology, a lot of science that's in play, and it's not as easy as we make it look sometimes to get it done right.
Well, and by the way, it's getting more complex every day.
Right.
Now everything's robotic, navigated, endoscopic, and the amount of technology that rolls into your department alone
Yeah.
is astounding compared to 15 years ago. The level of complexity and the amount of it. And it's coming down contaminated, by the way. Right? Or it might be coming in off the street from somebody.
It's as
and you gotta
dangerous
get it done. Yeah.
and dirty as it will ever be in the cycle of care, right? It's coming in the OR clean and organized and packaged, but every time it comes to sterile processing, it's as dirty and dangerous as it will be. Oftentimes, it's not put back in the tray, nice and neat and clean. We're covered in PPE. We don't have good lighting. There's a lot of water in play. We're reaching into case carts. We're reaching into trays. This is the most dangerous spot that you can be engaging with surgical instruments at, and it's the sterile processing team that's doing it on the daily. And they're not just doing it leisurely, everything's fine. Like, yeah, surgical, all this volume's coming down. Boom, 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 boom. And you got, calls from the OR saying, hey, we actually need that case back now in an hour. Can you get it to us, right? So, yeah, tons of pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. So, the name of this podcast, Sutures and Sense. Here's one of the things I want to ask somebody like you about, because let's talk about the economics of the OR, right? I have this written down. The OR is 60%, 60, of the revenue to a hospital. And 99% of an ASC's revenue, I assume maybe they sell candy bars or something. Like, I don't even know what the 1% would be, right? And I've described sterile processing to people as like the pit crew. Like, I've become an F1 guy because every guy in America is watching Drive to Survive, right? So I'm an F1 guy. Do you know what F1 tire men make? The dudes who
I don't know.
$250,000 a year, right? And what you do, like if that guy puts the tire in wrong, Max Verstappen may die, right? If you do the same thing poorly, patients die. Right? Like, there is no less level, and it's actually a higher level. It's a higher level of sensitivity because Max knows what he's going in for. Right? So why is it, why does, not SPD struggle, but why is it a struggle for SPD to get $100,000 capital for a new washer to keep up with the enormous increase in orthopedics or robotic cases?
Yeah,
when you are the pit crew for 60% of the revenue in a hospital.
Yeah, that robotic point, such an interesting dynamic because robotics just kind of took the OR by storm, and you started getting all these ORs onboarding these new robots, and then what would happen is we would get calls like, hey, we actually can't fit these robotic arms in our sinks. They're too long, and we can't fit them in our ultrasonic cleaners. They're too long because when all these things were built, there were no robots out there. And yeah, we didn't get the investment, right? So like they bought this $1 million robot, but they didn't want to spend $20,000 on a new sink, or they just didn't even think about it.
That's actually what I think happened more often than not. It never even showed up on their radar.
No. Yeah. And so to directly answer your question, I think one of the clear gaps out there that we've been attempting to step into is when you become a sterile processing manager and director, just like I said, the week before you were a tech or a supervisor, and now you're handed this budget and now you're competing for capital dollars from all these other people who went to college, went to grad school, they have their MBAs, right? So like you're competing with pharmacy, you're competing with director of surgical services,
Yeah.
competing with radiology, like, and you're sitting in there, same bucket of dollars, right? There's no more dollars anywhere. Magic dollars is just set aside for SPD. It don't get set aside unless you get your big boy pants on and you can justify. But who teaches us to justify, Cope? Nobody.
Well, I feel bad because, you become, in this case, me, you become such friends with so many of these people. Like, for instance, I had one, when I used to do cases at this one hospital, we had surgery doing spine in there 3 and 4 days a week. I was in there constantly, right? Mm-hmm. And Jill Clawater would call me every night at 8:30 and say, just double checking, I have this labeled right for your cases tomorrow. And then she would apologize, right? She was the instrument tech. She would apologize. I'm so sorry to bother you. I know you're the family. Hank, she must have done this 400 times. And 400 times I said back to her, Jill, you can call me at 2 a.m. Like, I appreciate it. And then I would sit there and go, and nobody knows what she does.
Right.
She doesn't have the right equipment to do what she's having to do. And she has the decency, respect for the patient, to call me every night to confirm what she had was right. And we need more people like that, right? And to get them, you got to get them paid. You got to get resources. You got to get them the things to do their job well, or they're not going to stay, right?
Here's a dynamic that I realized maybe 2 years into leadership that I started coaching my staff against, and then also communicating to the C-suite. For years and years and years, sterile processing would just get it done no matter what, right? So like you bring in trays at 7 o'clock and you got a 7:30 case, we're going to complain, but we're going to get the trays too, right? Because we get it done. Well, that dynamic of these people with hearts of gold, they care about the patient. They also care about, getting these cases on time, want the surgeons to be happy. Like, they care about what they're doing, but they're so good at doing so much with so little, and you can only do that for so long until the system itself gets so overstressed that then you see the errors, then you see the breakdowns, then you see the non-compliance, and you see the shortcuts. And we started seeing that again with the kind of upswing of robotics and the more complex procedures, and then more and more loaners coming into the system. And now literally we just can't keep up no matter how hard we try. And again, with a greater emphasis on compliance from the regulatory side, we cannot cut corners maybe in the way that we were before. Not because we were trying to do bad, but just because the pressure and the lack of staff, the lack of time was just so big on us that we were making those decisions. So it's really interesting to kind of tell your staff, hey guys, do what you can do, but do not do more, because if you do, you're going to burn yourself out, and then you're going to quit, or you're going to tune out, and it's going to be bad for all of us. So do not do more than you can do. That's going to tell me the work that's still there, the volume that's still there after everyone has done what they can do. That's the numbers, that's information that I need to take up to C-suite and say, hey, this is the work we're not getting done, and everyone's doing everything they can do, but we're not burning out here, because that's actually going backwards. So it's really important for the C-suite to understand that. It's important for sterile processing to understand that. We all want to be like martyrs, right? Lay down our lives for this process. And many of us do, but again, you can only do that so long before you just burn up.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned something earlier, sort of that now you're calling it the age of sterile processing. Mm-hmm. And I like that, because I think that's an accurate way to describe. I think people are starting to figure it out. And it's interesting, the Joint Commission coming in, being a benefit. But it's actually a sign that they know it's annoying. It's hard sometimes.
Right.
But it's actually a sign that you matter, because now the Joint Commission or DNV or whomever is doing it, AAAHC is coming in and inspecting you, because for a long time they didn't understand it, and I think they've caught up a little bit. You mentioned that investment is coming in. What do you mean by that? Give me some examples of that, because that's interesting. You're the first person I've heard say that.
Oh yeah. Well, we can start with AI, right? That's the big talk of the town everywhere these days. Well, AI is all over healthcare, but AI is even in play already now for sterile processing. You got companies figuring out through machine vision what's in this tray, what's not in this tray. How many trays do we have coming through? How can we organize and report not only on the sterile processing side, but how can we catch what's actually crossing over in to the patient from the back table to get some utilization rates, because that comes into play for sterile processing. We got these trays, got 100 instruments, only 13 of them on average are ever being used. We don't really have the ability to capture that data. Well, now you got AI, and you got companies out there who see the opportunity that are now capturing that information. So that's one example, right? But on the robotic side, we finally caught up, right? So now there's companies that are creating ultrasonic washers specific with cycles for robotics. You got cages now that can carry these robotics arms. Like, everything is about 2, 3, 4 years behind what's going on in the OR, but it's finally coming to SPD.
Yeah, at least it's coming. I mean, because for a long time it wasn't. Yeah, it just wasn't. And I remember somebody explaining to me how to clean a Da Vinci arm.
Yeah.
Before some of that equipment was out. It was probably 6 or 7 years ago. And I remember thinking, how in God's name can you do that? How can you follow the instructions for use? It's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day. ORs are getting busier. Pandemic notwithstanding. They're getting faster. They're getting busier because reimbursements go down. And when reimbursements go down, you have to increase caseload. Surgeons are getting faster. Turnover times are getting faster. And the interesting thing is sterile processing is slowing down because they have to follow instructions for use, because of Joint Commission, because there's none of that. Let's not call them cutting corners. Let's call them smoothing down some of those corners. Right?
Yeah.
And I actually think it's good because it makes you can only go as fast as your slowest runner. And sterile processing isn't slow. Sterile processing is now being required to do it the right way every time. Yeah. And
I mean, they're being educated. Yeah. Right? They're being educated. Now all these technicians who for years they had gaps in their training and competencies, now they're listening to podcasts, they're going to conferences, they're like, oh crap, we've been doing that wrong. I'm coming back and I'm going to start doing it right now. And you're right. It slows down the process.
Yeah. Do you ever, there was a big trend, not a big trend, there was a trend for a while that I saw that would have new OR techs spend a week in sterile processing and have a new sterile processing tech spend a week or so in the OR. And it seemed very, very high-minded and gallant. I loved it. I didn't really see much of it. Yeah. Like, I don't hear much about that anymore.
Yeah.
Any value to that?
I do think there's some value in that. Is that going to solve the world's problems? No. I think it's important, though, going back to the cultural piece, to introduce the team to the very process, or the varied processes in each of these departments. The surgeon as well, like you said that at the beginning, like really getting these young surgeons, new surgeons into sterile processing. Like one of the biggest names to hit the map, kind of crossing over with Beyond Clean, was Dr. Peter Nickel in 2017, 2018. And he told the story of, he'd been the surgeon for years and years, and then he finally went down to SPD, and it shocked him, jaw dropped. And he was like, oh my goodness, this is what y'all have to go through for every single tray. This is the complexities. Yeah. It just completely mind-boggling. So yeah, like, getting nurses to see that, that's important. Getting SPD into the OR, that's important. But it's much more important what happens after that. Are you maintaining that respect level? You maintain the communication. You're retaining the teamwork about what's going on across these different teams. I think that is where the big breakdowns happen. It's good. I support it, but we definitely need more than just that.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. But I think it's a good thing to do. Yeah. It is certainly not solitary. You know some of the products I've sold over the years, and we would get asked all the time, why can't I get my stuff back faster from by the OR, right? And because I had people in sterile processing teach me the whole process, I would say, well, listen, here are the steps of this. And I'd tell them, here's the time. And I'm like, so unless there's like a time machine in the building, you can't get your instruments back in 20 minutes. Like, it's just not going to happen. And we always found, like, when we explained that to people, at least they seemed to go, oh, I didn't know that. Right. And it was interesting. And then, I would always add the thing in that I've heard you guys say a million times. Hey, you want your instruments back faster? How about doing some point of use? How about doing a spray? Right. And like, I don't know. Like, all right. You want your instruments back. There's one thing you can do easily today. Well,
so that compliance window, that's the language I like to use for that, is if we did everything right, if we followed all the IFUs through decontam, through inspection, through packaging, through sterilization, if all of those compliance windows are met, that total compliance window, if you get it back before that time, we cut a corner, not good, right? So we shouldn't even beat that mark. That's the quality mark. Anything over that is fine, but anything under that, that's actually at risk for the patient.
Totally. Yeah. And that's what I think when you guys do a lot of this stuff, it helps educate them to say, because none of the surgeons want corners cut, but they don't understand what happens in that department anyway. And neither do the nurses for the most part. And I think if you guys could get, it's funny, you wouldn't need all the nurses and you wouldn't need all the surgeons. You'd need a handful, and then they'll tell their friends and they'll tell their friends. And it does proliferate, but it's just, so I'll change up on you a little bit then. What would you tell, I'm going to ask you these 3 questions. What would you tell sterile processing departments across the country, if you could, walk in for 10 minutes? What would you tell operating rooms, if you could, for 10 minutes? By the way, you're probably the closest person on the planet who could do this, just as a side. And what would you tell, and let's start with this one, vendors that come in your OR, in your sterile processing, and what would you tell those folks, if you could? You're the czar, Hank. I'm making you the czar. What would you tell them?
So for the vendor one, I'm going to be very self-serving here and say we have a new micro-credential that's going to be published here soon that Beyond Clean has put together specific to vendors that touch the sterile processing space. So this is any vendor who's got instrumentation or trays coming in through sterile processing. And what we do in that micro-credential is we have a curriculum that we put together to answer all of those questions, right? So like you just asked, like, what's the one thing you would say? Well, we've got a whole credential about all the things we want to say and all the things that would make you the best partner possible for your sterile processing team. But to short circuit and just give you a straight answer, I think the most important thing that you could do is ask questions and not assume a process or a policy. A lot of times we just get vendors who, like, they've gone into one hospital, they're like, oh, this is how they do it here. And then they take that knowledge with them and just assume, well, that's how they do it here. And it's so annoying and frustrating to get vendors and say, oh, but they let me do this at so-and-so, like across the street. I'm like, I don't give a crap what they do at so-and-so. This is my house. No, not quite that. But kind of. But kind of. Yeah. And so that humble approach to, hey, I'm new here. Tell me the way that you want it done in your process. And like you said, teach me what's going on here because I want to know it and I want to be a resource. You cannot lose with that attitude.
I like that. Because I was one. I still am a little bit. And, very few people do that. You know what's so funny? You know what's funny? Hank, they do it in the OR. If you're in a new OR, like I can't tell you how many times I would say to a circulator, okay, just what's the deal here? Tell me what to do. I know you're going to because they're a nurse, right? And just tell me how you do things here. And they'll say, well, what do you mean? This don't they do it this way everywhere? And I'm like, oh, I wish. So just tell me. And like, And if you're not sure, hit me. Right? I'll take it. But just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And vendors need to do a little bit more of that in sterile processing. What would you tell surgeons or the OR? What would you tell them, or that group, if you could?
Yeah, so I guess I'm going to be a little self-serving on this
Please
one, too.
Please do. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm asking you.
Okay, that's great. So we're 4 years in to the launch of Beyond Clean. And over those 4 years, we kept getting people ask us, hey, you're doing awesome things with sterile processing content, but do you have any OR content? Are you educating OR nurses in this way? Do you have webinars? Do you have conferences? And so we did a couple of those. We began getting our conferences approved through CCI for points toward the CNOR certification. So that was always kind of in the ethos of Beyond Clean. Well, finally, in 2021, we sat down and said, hey, they're asking for it. Let's give it to them. We started a perioperative podcast and brand called First Case. Mm-hmm. And so everything that we've been talking about that's true for sterile processing and the platform that we built at Beyond Clean being the central nexus, we've carried that over into the perioperative space. We launched that brand with some great perioperative SMEs on the nursing side, on the CNO side, and also on the regulatory side, and just a tremendous growth pattern, right? So that was launched in 2021. Mm-hmm. So we're just 2.5 years in, and it's going crazy out there. So if you're interested in what would we say to the OR, we're saying it every single day through First Case, so you can go check it out over there.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
How about sterile processing? And I think we sort of covered it, but you walk in and go, Hank, you got 2 minutes. What should these people be thinking about?
I wouldn't even talk to the leaders because we say enough through the podcast, through my articles to the leaders. I would turn to the technicians and say, hey, the world of growth and potential in sterile processing is endless. You can improve your department. You can improve yourself. You can improve the whole freaking industry. That's how wide open it is. It's like the Wild West. Anybody who gets in and asserts themselves and says, I'm going to focus on, and this is the biggest differentiator that I see between success and failure. Don't boil the ocean. Don't eat the whole elephant. What's that one thing that you can go real deep in and really set yourself out as, hey, I'm the brush guy, and I'm going to learn every freaking thing there is to know about these cleaning brushes. If it's a brush, I want to be the guy or the gal that everyone comes to and says, hey, what about these nylon brushes? Hey, what about these cannula brushes? Hey, what about these little toothbrush-looking things? If you do that down deep, what you're doing, number one, is you're learning the process of going deep into a piece of content. But number two, you're showing the industry that you can develop expertise. No one knows everything there is to know about sterile processing, and anyone who acts like they do is lying to you. So what you got to do is you got to pick your lane, go as deep as you can in that lane, and I promise you will grow as a technician. You're going to grow your career, you're going to grow your brand, and you will impact the industry.
And people will notice too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's fascinating.
Yep.
As usual, I ask questions to really smart people, and I listen.
And you blow a lot of smoke. Go.
But I can't predict their answer. I would have not predicted that. That's what you say.
Right.
I like that. That's good. Now, because again, we started this whole podcast because I wanted to learn stuff. So I ask people, and then they teach me stuff. Well, yeah, I mean, you have to, or you just, you get. If you rest, you rust, right? So, man, listen. So we've been going a good while here, and it's me. I could talk to you all day about this stuff. How do people get in touch with you?
Right.
Where should people find you? And you can just lay that out here, and then we'll make sure it's in the show notes.
Yeah. So LinkedIn is the place to go. I've got a what do they call those things? Not novelty URL. Hey, that's what it is. But if you go to linkedin.com/in/sterile processing, that's me. So LinkedIn/in/sterile processing, and you can track down my profile, or you can just search for Hank Balch, weapon of mass microbial destruction. or you can reach out to me through the Beyond Clean email address, hank@beyondclean.net. And stay tuned. I know we talked about a lot of fun things, but we got a lot of big announcements coming up here this fall and into the spring. So if you care about SPD and if you care about these topics, we'd love to pull you into the network and do some fun things together.
Well, I love it. He's the weapon of mass microbial destruction. He's the original clean freak, his T-shirt tells me. And he fights dirty. And I love it. I love it.
I mean, I would say my big thing, the thing I thought was coolest during this interview, by the way, and I know we talked about this, was the competing against other members of a hospital for the pie economy. Because it's talking about the unfair truth that most people in sterile processing don't have a business background. And then they're expected to make business cases on why they should get something versus another part of the hospital. And historically, as he's pointed out, they've struggled doing that because they have no... I mean, like, I would almost argue, and we might be put it like, do you know a single person in sterile processing who has an MBA?
I don't think so. Yeah, that's the thing. It's funny. I actually wrote down, he actually said, who teaches this stuff, Cope? Right?
Well, and the funny part is you and I both know that, like, every other part of the hospital, I know, I'd almost say it's like harder to find a perioperative director or director of surgical services who doesn't have an MBA.
Right.
Or,
right.
So, yeah. Or a head of a like those people who are running those portions of the hospital, basically they're a pharmacist, they're a nurse, they're a radiologist, they're a whatever. And then they were like, hey, I like the business aspect of this. I'm going to go get an MBA so I can become the director, the vice president of surgical services, the vice president of pharmacy, the vice president of radiology, and like going up against them it's honestly, it's borderline unfair. It's like Georgia playing the Sisters of the Poor.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's interesting. You get a master's of business administration to try to master the administration of business, right? Yeah. Like, it's complex, it's hard, and these folks don't have that kind of training, and they have a bit of a like they're not welcome at most of these tables. And I think it is changing. That's why Hank calls it the age of sterile processing. But like the Enlightenment didn't occur in 15 days. It occurred like over 400 years. Let's hope it goes faster than that. But I mean, that's what these folks are up against. And to me, we call this sutures and cents for a reason. To me, to not have them at the table to understand it is actually counterproductive. And he talked about it perfectly. Like, hey, you want to do all this stuff, and I can't put the robotic arms. I don't have a sink. And you won't spend $20,000 for a sink that they fit in. And those guys, the sterile processing people I've talked to, they have to go sing for that. And then when it comes, it's like Santa Claus gave them something. No. That's the attitude they have to change. It's an investment in my operating room. You're just a part of it. And that's the attitude that I think Hank and those guys are trying to change. And I know you and I have stood there and we get it. We understand. And I mean, I won't speak for you, but I think it's crazy that these places don't start looking at this. So, it's a fascinating interview. And I think what they're doing is shining a light. What did he say? He called it, if there's an assumption of simplicity, and that's where the hubris comes from. I'm going to tell you something. You use the word hubris, you're pretty smart. That's a guy who understands the business of sterile processing.
I had to look it up. I didn't know what it meant.
All right. All right. Because the saying all bleeding stops eventually applies to both surgical patients and healthcare balance sheets. We'll see you next time on Sutures and Sense.